Hello, everybody. Josh Brown here, back for another great episode on Franchise Euphoria. Well, today's episode is brought to you by IndieFranchiseLaw.com, a leading resource in the franchise space to help you if you're considering buying a franchise, turning your business into a franchise, or growing your business through a licensing or franchise structure. So go on, check it out, IndieFranchiseLaw.com. I think you'll find a lot of valuable and free information as you continue to kind of weigh franchising and licensing and the growth of your business. Without further ado, I hope you enjoy today's episode. Today's episode of Franchise Euphoria is really special to me. It's my 300th episode. Hard to believe that back in March 2013, I started Franchise Euphoria. It's now 7+ years later, my 300th episode. And I couldn't be happier to share that with Kate Erickson from Ditch Busy and Entrepreneurs on Fire. Kate's really the engine behind Entrepreneurs on Fire, an award-winning podcast where John Lee Dumas interviews inspiring entrepreneurs who are truly on fire. She's also the host of the podcast Ditch Busy and co-author of the podcast journal, Idea to Launch in 50 Days. You can learn more about the free training Kate and John have created for entrepreneurs who are ready to achieve financial and lifestyle freedom over at eofire.com. Thrilled that, John and Kate have been such good friends over the years, and thrilled to have Kate on today to talk specifically about her podcast, Ditch Busy, and how she really helps people focus on getting their time back, managing their time, dealing with scenarios in which they can de-stress their lives. I can't think of a time where that's more applicable than right now amidst COVID, and we talk about that during this interview. But we also talk about her journey from just working with John on Entrepreneurs on Fire to really getting out there with her own podcast, her own voice, her own brand, and how she was able to do this. She's a wonderful person. She's a good friend. And I just know you're going to love this interview with Kate Erickson. Hello, Kate. Welcome back to Franchise Euphoria. How you doing?
I'm so good, Josh. How are you?
I'm good. I was looking back and you were my 10th episode back in, I think, July 2013, because I started this podcast March 1st, 2013. And I started it because of you and John. I mean, I'm listening to John's Entrepreneur on Fire. I'm not sure when he started that, but it had to be 2012 or 13, somewhere in there.
Yeah, just right before you in September 2012.
Was that right? Okay, so I started mine just on a whim after listening to John's and a couple others and thinking, oh, this is kind of a cool medium. And it's just been awesome, our friendship over the years. And I realized, check this out, Kate. I realized this morning from my podcast coordinator, Jordan, she said, do you know that Kate's going to be your 300th episode? I was like, no way. That's awesome and super fitting. Consider-
Wow, that is so amazing. Happy anniversary.
Well, thank you. I can't believe it's 300 episodes
Yeah.
into this thing. But literally, I started it because I was seeing what was going on with you guys and Entrepreneur on Fire. And the idea was, in my niche in franchising, how can I put out good, valuable information for people who are considering buying franchises or turning their business into franchises? And I will tell you this, 7+ years later, out of all, the different social media, all that other stuff, the podcast has been the best return on investment.
Yes.
I know you guys have seen that too.
Absolutely. I mean, so that's the thing, Josh, is like you have such a beautiful example of like this business that has continued to grow and flourish. And as with podcasting, as like a marketing arm for you, a connection arm, a reach arm. And for us, it was quite unique because the podcast was our everything from the very beginning, which, a lot of companies will add the podcast in the way that you did and see great results like that. And for us, I mean, that was really the foundation of the business.
Well, when we first chatted, I remember back in episode 10, it was really, you were behind the scenes of Entrepreneur on Fire and everything that, John Lee Dumas was doing with that and growing that brand. You were really the engine behind it, as I would call it. Maybe those are my words. I don't know if you would use those words too, but you really were kind of putting things in place. You were systematizing things. You're the process oriented mindset. And now you flash all these years forward. In between, you had a great podcast, Kate's Take, which I don't know if you're still doing or not, but I know that it was fantastic. And now we flash forward to, you've got a podcast called Ditch Busy that I want to dive into this episode, because part of the reason that I'm so happy to have you on is we are just living in a time right now where people have been put onto a pause, right? With COVID-19, with the pandemic. There's a lot of people in good times and during the pandemic who are stressed out about a whole lot of things and thinking about how to organize their life, reorganize their life, and really get through. And I think that's your secret sauce all these years. And it's it started with, Entrepreneur on Fire. You're still obviously involved there, involved with the podcast journal. It showed its way through Kate's Take and now into Ditch Busy. So talk about that before we dive into the details of Ditch Busy. Talk about your sort of path over the last 7+ years.
Yes. Okay. Well, this is why I love you so much, Josh. I literally refer to myself as the engine of the business. So you were spot on, like nailed it. And it really goes back, like the progression for me in its essence has never really changed. But what I would say has taken like an accelerated trajectory, if you will. And I don't mean accelerated in like faster per se, but my personal growth through this whole entrepreneurial experience has been paramount. I mean, when I joined John at Entrepreneurs on Fire in 2013, I had really no clue what entrepreneurship was all about. I had only worked in corporate jobs before that. I had no idea what I was going to be able to lend or add to this team or how I was going to contribute. I mean, my confidence was a negative, and there were just so many limiting beliefs I was holding on to, confidence issues or lack thereof confidence, and all of these things. I mean, this experience and this opportunity has really turned me into a better, more confident person that is able to, share value and share my experiences and look at that from such a different perspective. So I mean, over the years, like what I do in the business, sure, it's continued to evolve and grow as John and I have put out more products, different services and offerings, and we've dabbled in pretty much everything. We've tried everything when it comes to our business, because we like testing things out like that. And every single part of it has been like such a learning and growing experience for me.
Do you think the emergence of your confidence is a result of the success that the Entrepreneur on Fire brand has had? Because obviously it's turned into this huge brand with a lot of offshoots. Or was it, a combination of that and you really finding, your passion, your voice, your interests along the way?
Honestly, I attribute so much of it, like probably 90% of it, to me starting my own podcast. That was really the start of me proving to myself that I had value to share, that I did have a voice and a message, and that what I was contributing to the business could impact other people. And that was shown to me in a very bright light through the podcast. And it was through the podcast that I started getting speaking engagements, conferences asking me to speak on stage. It was from those, opportunities speaking on stage that, and in between, being invited on others' podcasts like your podcast and being invited to virtual summits and all of these opportunities, each one of them a very big stepping stone for me to continue proving to myself. I mean, this is what I think is like the biggest hindrance to someone really being able to identify and embrace their confidence level, is being able to prove to yourself that you can do this and that you do have an impact to share. And it wasn't until I took action and was able to actually put something out there that I had listeners from my podcast starting to reach out to me and say, "Oh my gosh, this is so incredibly helpful." That is, of course, validation in some ways that, wow, I do have a voice and I do have a message and I can help people. Here I am sitting thinking like, who am I to share this information? And, the imposter syndrome gets all of us at one time or another. And it was through the podcast, through those speaking engagements. And then, yeah, to your point of course, our business and how it has grown and what John and I have been able to accomplish together with a very small team definitely adds to that day over day.
Yeah, I mean, you've definitely bursted out from the shadows to the extent you were ever in there. I mean, you were never in there in my mind, but like for certain people who would just kind of you'd be behind the scenes, and now you've developed and are growing your own brand, which is just incredible to watch. What do you think it is about? Because I want to talk about specifically a minute or two on Kate's Take, your initial podcast, and then go into Ditch Busy. But what do you think it is about the podcasting medium that works so well for people, that helps, people just relate so much to the people who they're listening to?
Well, I think that it allows for almost an immediate connection that is not really easy to accomplish online. Of course, like, writers have a voice and you go to somebody's website and you kind of get a feel for their personality, maybe based on design or colors or photos and these different types of things. But before podcasting, I really don't know because video wasn't really that big, 10 years ago either. I really don't know of a way that you could just so intimately and immediately connect to someone's personality and their values and their message and what they were trying to share, how they were trying to add value. And the fact that there's such a low barrier to people being able to download and consume podcasts because you can do it on the go. You can download them so you don't have to have an internet connection in order to listen to a downloaded podcast. And just this low barrier to entry for people to consume that content and to find so much value in it really accelerates that connection from a know, like, and trust perspective, too. I mean, you talked about the ROI from your podcast, and I truly believe that that is because of the connection that we're able to create with our listeners. And that has certainly, been the case for me and for thousands of other podcasters that I talk to. I mean, it always kind of seems to come back to that, is this connection and this engagement that you can have with your community through the podcast. And Josh, I'm sure you've experienced it. I've absolutely experienced it. You go to an event or a conference and you see the host of a podcast that you listen to, and it's almost like, I have a fangirl moment or something. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's Erica Mandy from the Newsworthy. Like, I listen to her podcast all the time, and then all of a sudden I'm standing in front of Erica. I feel like I know her. I feel like we hang out every day. Like, it's this connection on a totally different level.
Totally, totally. I mean, that's how I ended up getting my first client from the podcast. It was all the way 7.5 years ago. I mean, I had other clients, but my first client that came directly from the podcast after I'd launched, you sit there and you wonder, is anybody listening? Like, really, am I just
Yeah.
doing this for? And then I get a call out of the blue, and it was somebody from Alabama that wanted me to do some work with them on their franchise. And I said, well, let me tell you about myself. And they said, oh, I know all about you. I listen to your podcast. And I thought, all right, there's something to this. So no, I agree with everything that you said. Talk about Kate's Take. And so that was your first foray into podcasting, right?
Yes.
So you start that. I'll let you explain the details, but it's essentially about, operations and systems and processes and so forth. Talk about that first, launching into your first podcast, and then what led you to also work on Ditch Busy.
Definitely. So I started Kate's Take again. I knew it at the time. Like, I needed some way to kind of get myself over myself, really. I had like this block where I was creating content on our blog and I was sending out email newsletters. And that had certainly helped me kind of like open up a little bit to be able to share knowledge and expertise that I had. But the podcast was kind of a new level to that, because when you put your voice out there, that's just like a whole other set of imposter syndrome things that could start happening to you, of like, oh my gosh, what if I sound like a dork, or that sentence wasn't quite perfect and I said way too many times, all of these self-conscious things that come up that were certainly coming up for me. So that's exactly what led me to start the podcast. I thought I need to do something that's going to get me so far outside of my comfort zone that I'm just going to have to get over it. So I launched Kate's Take as a way to bring my perspective from the business out to the forefront. Because, of course, John's the face and the voice of the business, and he has so much incredible value and knowledge and experience to share. And he's very talented in so many different areas. But the reason why he asked me to join the team is so I could like kind of pick up all this operational, software tools, programs, managing our team, community, all of these parts that aren't necessarily his zone of genius. I thought, well, why not share those with our audience? Because, yes, our audience loves hearing John talk about the inspiration and have guests on and learn about different businesses and failures and ahas. But what if I came at it from a perspective of just kind of, you know, pulling up the rear, for lack of a better description, and sharing with people how we actually do this? Because we started getting tons of questions from our audience about, like, okay, you guys have this successful podcast and this successful business where you've started creating masterminds and online courses and you do sponsorships and affiliate, like, how do you do all of this? And so I thought, well, I could start a podcast and I could share with people exactly how we do it. And so that was kind of the start of Kate's Take. And I love doing that podcast so much. I did phase it out when I started Ditch Busy, and I just felt like I was ready for a new progression. I suppose there was absolutely nothing wrong with Kate's Take. I loved doing it. I loved the connection that it created with my listeners. I loved that engagement. And I thought, well, I can still continue that connection and that engagement, but I can do it in a way that's focused in an area that's very top of mind for me right now, something that I see so many entrepreneurs struggling with, which is time management and just constantly feeling overwhelmed. And so I thought, I had just gotten to my 5-year anniversary with Kate's Take, and I thought, what better time to kind of transition? I'm going to start a completely new podcast, completely new feed. I'll definitely urge and encourage my Kate's Take listeners to follow me on this journey. And I launched Ditch Busy to try and help people with a very prominent and real time pain point and struggle that I see so many facing.
Well, and I don't know any I mean, the beautiful thing is, Kate's Take is evergreen. It's there. People can go and still consume all the great content with it. And it's such a good transition into Ditch Busy because I don't know any entrepreneur or business owner uh, who doesn't struggle with time management. And it's one of those things where when you even feel like you're on top of it, how quickly it can fade away. So, talk to me about that a little bit. I mean, the sense of and when I say time management, and I really think about that sense that all of us have had of just feeling overwhelmed and feeling like there's not enough time in the day to get done with what we feel like we need to get done with. I know for in my case, and I imagine I'm not totally unique here, I might start off the day thinking, here's the 5 things I need to get done with, and I'm ready to go, and there you go. And the next thing I know, with the phone ringing, with the emails, with other things that pop up, those 5 things turned into 12 things, and I ended up getting done with, 5 of the things out of the 12, but it's not the 5 things I started off the day needing to get done with. So, I mean, how do we get past that? How do we deal with that with so many people not only wanting attention and wanting immediate responses, but so many ways to get a hold of everybody now? I mean, it's just hard to balance it all.
Absolutely. And you nailed it when you were talking about, we continue adding things to our list throughout the day, and it's not setting those expectations and literally just saying yes to too many things that gives us that sense of overwhelm, that feeling that you're talking about. It literally is at the, like, baseline simplest form. Overwhelm comes from having too much to do at once, feeling like you need to be in 2 different places at once, or feeling like you have 10 times more to accomplish than, you have time in the day. And even trying to hold too many things in your mind at once. This is scientifically proven to destroy your productivity and your ability to think clearly, because when without like writing stuff down or putting it on a scheduler or using a task management program, we try and hold all this stuff in our heads, and it creates this sense of, how am I ever going to manage or handle all of this stuff? A lot of the time when I think about it, I think of people at a buffet, right? They take their plate down the line, and like they pick up like this cute little dainty plate at the beginning, and then they're like trying to shove 50 different things on it. Like, the plate's too full, right? You can't put any more on the plate. And this is what we do with things in our life, with to-dos, with tasks. We just keep putting them on our plate even though they can't fit. But the reason that we continue doing it is because we're not giving ourselves that visual cue. When you're at a buffet and you put one too many things on your plate, like, stuff's going to start to fall off the plate. But with tasks and to-dos, if we're not using a software or a tool or a calendar to hold ourselves accountable and to visually see like, oh, that's too much, then we experience that overwhelm. So, I mean, at the foundation to getting rid of that sense of overwhelm, we have to make a commitment to ourselves to guard our time. Like, that's where it starts, right? There are going to be a set of steps that we can do on an everyday basis, so that when that feeling comes on, we can take a step back and follow those steps. But until we get to that point, we have to set the baseline. We have to give ourselves the foundation. So, the number one thing that we need to start doing is being brutal with what we say yes or no to. And I love this book, Essentialism by Greg McKeown. In it, he very gracefully and poignantly talks about, every time you say yes to one thing, you are saying no to everything else that you could be doing in that moment in time. And for me, that really brought into perspective, like, really thinking about that. Saying yes to one thing means you're saying no to everything else you could be doing at that time. It really brought into perspective to me how critical and important those yeses really are. So, having that brutal commitment to ourselves of like, we really need to start being more conscious of what we're saying yes or no to. And once we're committed to that, we have to start cleaning house and identifying what we want to stay and what we want to go. Because right now, as we're working on that foundation, on that baseline, like, we already went through the buffet line, right? Our plate is already overflowing. So we need to start cleaning off that plate and being like, okay, you know what? Maybe I didn't need like 17 crab legs. I can start with two. So this has everything to
But they're
do.
so good, Kate. They're so good.
I know, especially when they have the warm butter.
No, I mean, it's such a great point, and it's such a great illustration. It's funny, that Essentialism book by Greg
Mm.
McKeown, it's one of my favorite all-time books, and I actually, on a side note, just saw that he's launching a podcast, I think.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, he's been posting about it on LinkedIn and been communicating a little bit about it. So he's a fantastic guy, and it's a fantastic read. It's interesting because it's one thing to talk about keeping things essential and focusing on it. There's also, and I know you're familiar with Derek Sivers, and my wife and I always talk about. I think it was him from. He was a creator of CD Baby, but I think he's got this whole philosophy of if it's not a hell yeah, it's a
Mm.
no.
Mhm.
And we try to stick with that if we've got, hey, should we do this? Should we not do this? It's sort of along the lines of, should I take this on? Should I not take this on? It's like, well, is it a hell yeah? It's sort of like a maybe yeah. Well, then it's a no. Well, then it's a no, right? I mean, I think it's a good reminder of how to evaluate things. And so that's what I was going to ask you was, how do you or how do we as humans that, will fall back on bad habits? How do we continue to remind ourselves to make decisions that will benefit us and not get us back in the rut that we're trying to get out of so that we can say no to those things that we should not be saying yes to?
Yeah, I think in the beginning, it's so important to give yourself the space. So we need to start practicing not feeling as though we have to give an immediate answer to things. And just like you said, you and your wife have the system of, okay, let's like talk about it. Is this a hell yes or no? Then when we start to practice taking that step back, or, a lot of times someone will say, like, you're making a big decision, why don't you sleep on it? And that's because sometimes we're in situations where we're being asked to commit to something, and our willpower and our decision making abilities are completely shot because it's 4 p.m. in the afternoon. We've spent our entire day exhausting our mental energy and bandwidth. And when it gets to the point where someone's asking us something, our mind will literally do the easiest thing, the most non confrontational thing, which is, to just say yes. Because if you say no, then you're probably going to want to provide a reason for that. And so if you try and do that when your willpower is so low, when your decision making abilities are so low because of everything that you've already put your mind through that day, then you're going to be stuck with those, I like to call them premature yeses. We say yes because we think like, oh, I can't say no to that, or oh, I feel bad, or oh, I want to contribute. But what we don't take the time to recognize is that there are so many other ways that you can support people and that you can participate in things without having to say yes to something that you don't actually want to do. Now, when it comes to like, okay, I'm sitting here and I'm wondering whether I should say yes or no to something, this comes to what our goals are. And we have to have goals set in every area of our life for our personal health and wellness, for our business, for our relationships, for our family. And when you do have goals set in all of those areas of your life, which if you don't right now, I highly encourage you to set aside some time to really think about what your goals are in those areas of your life, because when you know those goals, it's going to become very easy for you to evaluate whether something is a hell yes or a no.
No, it's a great point because you can't skip that step. I mean, you have to know where you're going to know how you're going to get there. And the idea that, you can't just use a technology tool or some sort of tactic if you don't know where you ultimately want to go with your franchise, with your business, what your goals are in life. So you always have to figure that piece out. A lot of us end up, and I certainly know I end up in this boat from time to time in email hell, where you're just drowning in emails. And you've got a great episode on Ditch Busy about an email workflow. I'd love if you could kind of walk us through that a little bit, because I know when I hear from people or when I'm working with franchise folks, that is one of the consistent things you hear is people are just bogged down in emails all day long, which makes it really hard to get the things done that you need to get done with instead of just feeling like you're in response mode all day.
Absolutely. And I've gotten so much great feedback on that episode that you're talking about, where I walk through my email workflow, because I do think that I hit on a point where people have almost become conditioned, or it's almost like a safety to, oh, I'm not sure what to work on right now. I'll just go in my inbox, because people have been kind of conditioned to feel as though that is something productive, when in all reality, sure, certain aspects of being in your inbox are productive, but it is certainly not productive to have, for example, your inbox open all day long for you to just fall back on when you maybe don't have that willpower or that discipline to say, no, wait a second, I'm actually supposed to be working on this. So in that episode, the flow that I broke down for emails is first identifying tools that can help you in your email inbox, then making sure that you are only allowing yourself in your inbox at specific times and that they should be timed sessions. So I think probably the worst thing we could ever do is just say, okay, I'm going to check my email inbox twice per day, and then going in the morning for your first email check, but then never giving yourself like an end time for that, because I've been there before. I will be the first to admit it. Sometimes I go in my inbox in the morning and I could literally be in there all day long. So you have to set that time and hold yourself accountable for that. And then my next step in the workflow is my email categories. So I basically break every single email that I receive up into a specific category. And those categories, without me having to use like, important brain space or bandwidth, those categories signal for me because I've made this such a habit. Of course, it takes practice, but I've made it such a habit that these given categories that I have, I automatically know exactly how I'm going to handle those emails based on the category they're in. So, back to that first step of my workflow, the tools that I use, some of those tools are Boomerang for Gmail. I use Gmail, but there are different tools that you can use based on the
Yeah,
email.
Boomerang works with Outlook too. It's great.
Oh, okay, awesome. Yeah. So, there are different tools that you can use for different pieces of software like Boomerang. I use canned responses, I use Text Expander. And so, based on these email categories I have set up, I know exactly which tools I'm going to use to help me respond to these things in the most effective manner. So, I mean, bottom line, email workflow is about holding yourself accountable to not having your email as a crutch and to setting very specific time frames of when you're going to be in your inbox.
Yeah, and I think it's a Boomerang for those who don't know or don't use it is basically a tool, and it's fantastic where you can look at a message and then go Boomerang. You can set a time for it to it'll vanish from your inbox and then pop back up at another time so that you don't have your inbox just filled with unread messages. And it gives you sort of the ability to really time out when you respond and send emails. But the thing about it is too is I have found that with all the different ways in which we can communicate. Sometimes people send you an email and they don't get a response in an hour. Next thing you know, you're getting a text from them on your cell phone, or you're getting pinged them on. I know you've been there. I know you've been there. So one of the things I'll be curious your thoughts on this. One of the things I'm starting to do, and I think you have to be really thoughtful in how you do this, and you have to look at the business you're in and the type of clients and customers and so forth that you work with, but is really telling people at the outset when you're working with them, here's how I communicate. So
Mm.
like here's like you might send me an email, but I check my emails at these times. And so if you send me an email at this time and you don't hear back for a while, I'm not ignoring it. I just, in order for me to stay on task so I can take care of everything, here's when I check it. And then here's sort of how our communication, almost like a communication plan, I feel like are more necessary now than ever because I don't know, Kate. I mean, if I don't respond to an email fast, I get people blowing up my phone, and it's like, yeah, I know, I'm here. I gotta get some other stuff done, and I respect it. I appreciate it. I like, everybody wants to feel like their services are needed and wanted, but in order to do things efficiently and be most efficient, we have to have a process to work through.
100%. And the boundaries that you set with honestly everyone in your life, it's so critical to the success of you being able to own your time management because the first thing to distract you from your focus time on a project or the first thing to distract you when you've just hit in that stride with writing a new piece of content or whatever is someone popping their head into your office or your phone going off or a call coming in. And when we set these boundaries and we're disciplined enough ourselves, so it's one thing to set the boundary, right? And exactly like you said, have a very straightforward, like, just so you know, this is how I work. And I've actually worked with clients before who we set up a system even for their internal team for these boundaries so that because she was having a really hard time focusing and getting into projects because her team would continually come into her office with these quote unquote time sensitive things that she just had to pay attention to right then. And I said, no, it's not about like ignoring or not having time sensitive be a thing, but you need to figure out the day and the time that your office is open so that that's when people can come into your office. It can't just be an open door all the time. Otherwise, you will never get anything done. So, yeah, I think it's absolutely what you were saying. The same with your clients is at the onset, and even now, even if you have been working with clients for months or even years and you find yourself in this situation, I think it is so critical that you sit down and work out a communications plan and approach it from the perspective of this is going to help me serve you better because I'm going to be 110% focused on you and only you during these times. Because right now, the way that it's going, I'm trying to focus in too many different areas. And I know that I could serve you better if I were able to, get down with this communication schedule that I'm sharing with you.
So, sort of a final thing I want to discuss with you on this episode, because I feel like we could talk about this stuff for a good long time. It's really interesting, good stuff. But I want to talk about COVID-19 in terms of, obviously we're in the midst of it right now. Things are looking like they're starting to open up. Businesses are starting to open, but really one of the interesting things about it, outside obviously of the health scare, is that it's really been a forced simplification of life and business in many respects. And I've kind of welcomed that a little bit. I mean, I felt like I needed it a little bit. And, just sort of like, okay, yeah, I felt like I could take a little bit of a breath. Obviously, scared about what's going on, but just from a business perspective, just kind of thinking, okay, now's a great time to kind of assess where you're at, where things are going. And I remember earlier on, towards the end of last year, you and I were speaking, and we were talking about the different conferences, physical conferences that we were going to plan on
Mhm.
going to. And that seems like kind of a surreal and interesting conversation now, right? Considering
Right.
they're all canceled and nobody knows when we'll be getting back together in person. But how does this whole idea of simplifying your life and creating more time for yourself and for your business, how have you seen that impacted by what we're dealing with this COVID pandemic?
Well, I really think that it opens up. I mean, as you said, the pandemic has just really created a different sphere of space for people that we're not used to. It's almost like I think you said at the beginning of the episode, it's a pause that we're in right now. And I think that in practicing, these time management, like daily routines and habits that we can adopt, that we're really creating that same space and time to really start living out the life that we want and to spend our time doing the things that we say are most important to us. Like, Josh, you mentioned working from home, you get to see your kids all the time and your wife. And like, how beautiful is it that in this extra space that you've been able to start adopting and really making habits, things that are so important to you that maybe before it was a little bit of a struggle or it was difficult due to time reasons. You didn't have enough time for X, Y, or Z. And I think that if we can start like being honest with ourselves about what those things are that we pushed to the back burner in everyday life because we were too busy or we didn't have enough time, well, now you do have some space and some time during this pause to figure out what types of routines and habits you could start adopting, how you could become better with your time management so that regardless of what happens moving forward, you're spending your time exactly how you want.
Well, and it's also been this sort of interesting, exercise in, I think we all will talk about how you got to focus on what you can control and not focus as much on what you can't control.
Mhm.
Well, there's nothing like to show you that than a pandemic, right? I mean, we can't control that. All we can control is our response and how
Mhm.
we respond to that. And, I love the positive spin on it because, obviously everybody has been affected by this, knows people who have been affected, in some instances lost their lives. But we can only control certain aspects. And so the silver lining, one of the silver linings is to, I think, be able to sit back and take stock of what it is, not only that you're grateful for, but how you're going to position yourself going forward in whatever our new normal is. I mean, I don't think anybody really knows what that's going to be, but I think that the time management component to it is at the forefront. I mean, it's just
Mhm.
at the forefront because this is almost like a restart in many ways for people. No, I can't tell you, Kate, for so long, I wanted to be able to work remotely, multiple days. I thought, that way I could make myself be home for dinner with the kids each night and the family and stuff like that. And I just never fully did it until I was forced into it. And now that
Mhm.
I'm forced into it, when essentially we go back to normal, I don't think I'm going to. I think I'm going to continue to work remotely. And that's a time management component of sort of how I manage my day. The fact that I don't have to go drive to work. drive from work, the number of meetings that we have where I think back about, oh, gosh, I really need to go drive for that meeting. I could have just done a
Mm,
Zoom call. You know what I mean? I mean, I
yeah.
think those are all really important things. And I think what you're talking about in your podcast, Ditch Busy, the timing of it is so perfect because in good times, people need to know how to manage their time. But certainly in times of crisis like this, it's just so important to have a plan and to be able to execute a plan and to have flexibility to tweak a plan along the way.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of it too, I mean, going back to kind of like the habits and the rituals that maybe we've wanted to adopt in our life for a really long time, but for one reason or another, they've always kind of been pushed to the back burner. Well, now is a perfect time for you to figure out what those habits and those rituals are, because I know for me, I've really found out about myself. I mean, I knew this before, but it's definitely been highlighted during this time how important to me some type of routine is. And, before I almost took, like, for example, my morning routine, I almost took it for granted a little bit. But now, when everything is so up in the air and so unpredictable, I'm craving more than ever that predictableness. Like, I want to know every single morning, this is exactly what's going to happen. I find comfort in that. And I think that if we can all kind of take a step back and start, reflecting on what's coming up for us and how we're feeling and how we're acting and, the emotions that we're feeling, I feel like we can turn all of that into really great habits and rituals moving forward. But, it's up to us to take the time to recognize those things, to really pay attention to them so that we can do good with them.
Well, I highly recommend everybody go to ditchbusy.com. That's ditchbusy.com. You can also go to eofire.com to consume all of Kate's great content. And Kate, I know I said this at the outset, but I can't thank you enough. And this is really like a full circle moment for me. Just that it literally, I mean, I'd like to say I planned for this, but I didn't. I had no idea. I had no idea you were going to be the 300th episode. And to think you were one of the reasons that I even got into this thing 7+ years ago. Thank you so much for coming on. I love what you're doing, love talking with you. You just have so much value to add to the world, and I'm just so happy to see you doing it in such a productive way. So thank you so much.
Josh, thank you so much. I'm so incredibly honored to be episode 300. And again, congrats on that amazing milestone.
Thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of Franchise Euphoria. If you enjoyed this episode or have enjoyed the podcast in general, I would really appreciate it if you could go to iTunes and leave me a rating and review. It really helps to get this podcast out to more and more people. So the easy way to do it is go to iTunes and in the search box, put in Franchise Euphoria. You will then see my cover art and you click on my smiling face that says Franchise Euphoria, and then click on the link that says ratings and reviews. It's that simple, but boy, oh boy, does it mean the world to me when people leave ratings and reviews. And like I said, it really helps get the show out there. Once again, would love it if you would go to iTunes and leave a rating and review if you enjoyed this episode or other episodes of the show. And until the next time, happy franchising.